If you still believe narcissists are born, you're being misled. Narcissists are made, not born. Most people think narcissism just shows up, but in reality, it's often a product of experiences, especially rooted in childhood. Today, we'll talk about how narcissism begins at home and the 10 signs you were groomed to be one. Are you ready for number 1? You were praised excessively for superficial traits. When you were growing up, you might have heard things like, "You're so beautiful," or "You're the smartest one in the room," over and over again. Of course, it felt good, right? Who doesn't want to feel admired? But deep down, that kind of constant praise for your looks, talents, or achievements came with a catch. You were being trained to be someone rather than feel something. Psychologist Dr. Donna Nakazawa explains this dynamic in her book, Childhood Disrupted, saying that children who are constantly evaluated based on appearance or performance often disconnect from their internal emotional world to keep the praise flowing. Over time, you might have started believing that being seen as impressive was more important than being seen as human. That's grooming, not love, and it can quietly plant the roots of narcissistic behavior before you even realize it. Let's talk about number 2. You were taught to suppress vulnerability. What if hiding your feelings was the only way you thought you could survive? You probably grew up hearing things like, "Don't be so sensitive," or "Toughen up," whenever you showed sadness or fear. Maybe asking for help felt like weakness, and instead of comfort, you got silence or even punishment. Over time, you learned to hide those real emotions, putting on a mask of confidence or even arrogance just to protect yourself. Therapist Brené Brown talks about this in her book, Daring Greatly, where she says, "Vulnerability is the birthplace of courage, creativity, and change." But if you never got a safe space to be vulnerable as a kid, you might have convinced yourself, "If I show weakness, I'll be rejected." This survival strategy can turn into a habit where real feelings get buried, and a tough exterior takes over, which is often how narcissistic traits start to develop. Let's move on to number 3. Your parents used you as a reflection of themselves. Have you ever felt like you were living someone else's life, not your own? Maybe your parents didn't just raise you, they used you like a mirror to shine their own image. They wanted you to act, succeed, or look a certain way so they could feel proud or powerful. Instead of being seen for who you really are, you became a tool for their validation. Psychologist Alice Miller, in her book, The Drama of the Gifted Child, explains how children in this situation learn to sacrifice their true selves to please their parents. You might have grown up thinking, "I exist to fulfill others' egos, not my own purpose," which can leave you feeling lost and empty inside. When your identity is tied to someone else's image, it's no wonder you struggle with being authentic or feel trapped trying to meet impossible expectations. Now, let's continue to number 4. You were the golden child in a toxic family system. Have you ever felt like you had to be perfect just to keep your place in the family? Maybe you were the golden child, the one who seemed to do everything right, the favorite who was praised and put on a pedestal. But with that came a hidden price. You were set above others in the family, and sometimes even encouraged to put down siblings or the other parent to keep that special status. Therapist Stephanie Donaldson-Pressman talks about this in her book, The Emotionally Absent Mother, explaining how golden children can be trapped in roles that limit their true selves. You might have learned to believe, I'm only valuable when I'm superior, which means your worth feels tied to being better than others, rather than being accepted for who you are. This kind of dynamic creates a lonely kind of success, always needing to prove yourself and keep your perfect image safe. You shouldn't miss number 5. Emotional needs were met with transactional love. Have you ever felt like love was a currency you had to constantly earn? You might have grown up in a place where love wasn't just given, it was traded. If you did what was expected or succeeded, you got praise and affection. But if you failed or tried to build your own identity, love seemed to vanish like it was a reward, not a right. Therapist Dr. Craig Malkin, author of Rethinking Narcissism, explains this kind of transactional love teaches you that love must be earned, not given freely. So, you learned to keep score with people, measuring your worth by how much you please or comply. This creates a hard inner voice telling you that love isn't about connection, but about performance. It often leads to hiding your true self and always trying to prove you're enough. Are you still up for number 6? You were forced into adult roles prematurely. If you were the one calming your parents down, solving their problems, or picking up the emotional slack at home, then you were likely parentified. You were forced to grow up too fast. Instead of being nurtured, you were the one doing the nurturing. Psychologist Dr. Lindsay Gibson, in her book, Adult Children of Emotionally Immature Parents, says children in these roles often lose access to their own emotional needs because they're too busy managing everyone else's. You probably learned early on that chaos was your responsibility, and control became your safety net. So now, as an adult, you might feel like you always need to be in charge, or that letting go means danger. Deep down, you might carry the belief, if I'm not the one holding it all together, everything will fall apart, including me. Let's keep it moving to number 7. Your mistakes were either ignored or punished harshly. Did messing up ever feel like the end of the world? If so, you probably started believing that being wrong made you unlovable. Instead of being gently corrected or taught how to grow, you were shamed, or worse, made to feel like a failure. Physician Dr. Gabor Mate, in his book Scattered Minds, explains how children in these environments learn to associate mistakes with rejection, saying, when acceptance is conditional, shame becomes the default. So, you learned to hide your flaws, deny your slip-ups, or shift the blame because admitting fault felt too risky. Deep down, you carry the belief, if I'm not perfect, I'm nothing. And that kind of pressure doesn't just shape behavior. It rewires your sense of identity. Here comes number 8. You were rarely exposed to real accountability. Did you grow up seeing people dodge blame like it was a sport? If the adults in your life never owned their mistakes, then you were probably taught, without words, that accountability was something to avoid. Maybe they blamed each other, blamed you, or just pretended problems didn't exist. Over time, you learned that the safest move was to deflect, deny, or find someone else to take the fall. Psychologist Terence Real, in his book, The New Rules of Marriage, says, "What isn't acknowledged can't be healed. But if no one ever modeled emotional honesty, how were you supposed to learn it? So now, you might instinctively dodge responsibility, not because you're heartless, but because you were trained to think that accountability makes you weak or unsafe. Somewhere inside, you might still believe, if I admit I'm wrong, I lose control, or worse, love." Moving on to number 9. You were emotionally starved, but materially spoiled. Maybe your childhood looked good from the outside. Nice clothes, the latest gadgets, maybe even trips or a big house. But behind all that, there was something missing. Real emotional connection. You were given things instead of presents, and that kind of upbringing teaches you that love is something you buy, earn, or measure in stuff. Psychologist Dr. Shefali Tsabari talks about this in her book, The Awakened Family, explaining how children in these environments often grow up feeling overindulged but undernourished, emotionally speaking. You may have started to believe that attention, affection, or even your value could be replaced with material rewards. So now, without even realizing it, you might chase status or possessions, or expect others to prove love through what they give, not how they show up. Deep down, the belief becomes love equals things, not presence. And that confusion can echo well into adulthood. Finally, we're down to number 10. You were never taught to self-soothe. Chances are, when you were overwhelmed, whether scared, sad, or angry, no one stepped in to help you understand or calm those feelings. Maybe you were told to stop crying, go to your room, or just get over it. Instead of learning how to feel emotions safely, you had to figure out how to escape them. Psychotherapist Janina Fisher explains in her book, Healing the Fragmented Selves of Trauma Survivors, that when children aren't shown how to regulate emotions, they often develop coping patterns like dissociation, overcontrol, or emotional shutdown. So now, you might distract yourself, try to control everyone around you, or shut down completely when things feel too much. And somewhere inside, you still carry that early lesson. Feelings aren't meant to be felt. They're meant to be fixed or avoided. If any of this sounds familiar, narcissism is not entirely your nature. It could be that you were shaped by an environment that didn't give you what you truly needed. The good news is, now that you see it, you get to choose what happens next. Healing starts when you stop performing and start reconnecting with who you truly are underneath it all.